Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I will now open the floor for questions. In accordance with the Singapore tradition, I will ask my good friend Kishore to ask the first and brilliant question. The rest of you who wish to ask questions, can you please go to the microphones which are on the aisles?
Thank you, Tommy, for fixing me. But Tommy was very kind. We were having tea before this, and he said, Kishore, I'm going to fix you. So thank you. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I cannot ask a legal question. So I'm going to ask a political question. And as we all know, there'll be an election this month for the president. All elections take place in a certain political context. The problem we have in Singapore today is that the political context has changed significantly, and we seem to be operating in a very strange environment where in this presidential election, instead of the people focusing on the merits of the candidate, i.e. who will be the best man for the job, many people on the streets, from what I hear, seem to think this is a referendum on whether or not they approve for what the government has done. But what facilitates this perversely is that when you have a committee, the committee, I believe, of Eddie Teo, Chan Lai Fang, and Satpal Kata, who will certify the candidates, actually by certifying the candidates, they're saying they're all equally capable, and then you decide who you want. And at the end of the day, that provision in some ways liberates the sense of responsibility from the people, you know. They say, okay, you've certified all three are equally good. I can vote whoever I want. It doesn't matter anymore. So my question is that in this present political context that we have, how do we persuade the people to go back and focus on the merits of the candidate and not get distracted by other political issues?
I think I should call on the politician to answer a political question. So can you take off your legal hat and put on your political hat?
I'm not sure who is getting fixed here. But anyway, thank you, Kishore. You see, all elections carry with it the possibility that, well, carry with it consequences. The people get what they vote for. But there is no other better system. So we have to start with that. And all you can do, and what has been tried to be done with the presidential elections, is to have some pre-qualification process so that at least quite unsuitable candidates would be taken out. But I will take issue with one part of your question. I take issue with many parts of your question, but at least one part when you said once a PEC certifies them, they are all equally capable. No. The PEC is some sort of a mechanism to say that these are not obviously incapable people. They meet certain minimum requirements. Beyond that, it is up to the electorate to choose the person who persuades them that they are best suited for the position. And one of the, I hope would be the outcomes of discussions like this is to clarify in people's minds what is it that they are voting for. Are they voting for a person to go up there and quote unquote, for example, take on the government? Then I think we need to make clear what the constitutional position is. Are they voting for a person who is going to go out there and wield tremendous skill and influence in protecting our not inconsiderable reserves and put across to the Prime Minister his views on policies of the government? But in closed-door discussions, who can best do that? That's what the people are going to elect for, and we need to make that clear. But ultimately, all elections carry with it, as I said, the consequences, and people get what they choose. By the way, being a referendum on the government, we've just had a referendum on the government.
Yeah. Thank you, Shan. Leanne, a comment?
Well, I'm not a politician. So I found Kishore's comment on irresponsibility very intriguing, kind of like the idea that the PEC approves of you, that's a kind of an insurance. And that really goes to the question of the maturity of the voter. And a deeper issue you might want to consider, and this may be a little bit heretical, is whether you need a PEC in the first place, or whether Singaporeans can themselves ascertain whether someone is both independent, competent, and financially literate. I just put that out there for you to think about.
Okay. You're suggesting that maybe there's no need to have a committee to issue COE, is it? That's what you're saying?
Because the idea is it's paternalistic, and if daddy chooses, then you know the children don't have to grow up. And at some stage, we all have to grow up.
Oh. You want to do a quick response to that?
It'll get very philosophical, Prof. But
okay.
Really, at the end of the day, the merits of all systems are there to see. One possibility could have been that we just have Parliament elect the President. But the idea was that you wanted the President to be a check on the Parliament in the specific areas. So it doesn't work to have the Parliament choose the President. The other possibility is have the people choose the President. But Mr. Lee Kuan Yew explained why he didn't think that was suitable, because then you will have all manner of people competing, and it is a popularity contest. He wanted to limit the consequences of such a popularity contest at least to people who are not inherently unqualified. That is all that the PEC does. If we don't agree, well, that's a philosophical argument.
Okay. You have the floor. Can you introduce yourself? And if you have the option of whether to tell us which institution or political party you're affiliated to.
I am Ian Chong, and I only like to have a party. I'm not affiliated with a political party. Okay, so I'm not a lawyer, so I have a sort of question for the panel of lawyers that we have here. If, for instance, elected president, has some kind of a sentiment towards an issue that has sort of potential policy consequences, but not directly. So, if, for instance, a president feels that the handicap, more can be done for the handicap, and sort of says this in public, right? It may not be on everyone's top agenda right now, but it could have a downstream issue, downstream influence on policy. Then in that case, would that be constitutional, unconstitutional, illegal, or illegal? And what would the what does the Constitution then allow the government and the courts to do? Related to that, what if a elected president, for whatever reason, decides to hold up these key appointments, and that could potentially be very disruptive? What then can the government or the courts do? Thanks.
Okay. Do you understand?
I can try.
Okay. Why don't you start first?
I hope I understood you correctly. You said that if the president does certain things which the Constitution is silent about, for example, supporting the disabled, is that legal, illegal, and what can the government and courts do? Am I correct?
Yeah.
Well, I think I would actually look at a constitutional convention, because the constitutional text is not exhaustive. And you would see that when it comes to social causes, I don't think the government has had any problem with President Nathan and previous presidents highlighting causes like that. Because in a sense, they're relatively uncontroversial. The difficulty comes when you wade into a controversial topic, and then you get into questions of legitimacy. I voted for you to protect the money. Why are you talking about something else?
So what can the courts do? What can the government do in that case?
The courts can't do anything because the Constitution is silent on this. This would be a matter of political negotiation between two political branches.
Okay, Sean. No? No, she's finished.
I'm done.
She's finished.
I think I don't have much of a disagreement with Leanne, except I will put this qualifier in. You see, you talk generally about handicapped welfare. If the president were to go and open a place for handicapped people, or people who are physically disadvantaged, and says that more such centers should be opened, it's good, this sort of work should be encouraged, that's fine. But if he were to say the government should put more money in, that becomes a matter of government policy. And based on what I've just read out to you, under our constitution, he's not allowed to say that, except as advised by cabinet.
So if he does, what are you going to do?
If he does what he can do, he is acting unconstitutionally. there are various consequences laid out. I would prefer not to go into that.
Why? I mean, I'm just a voter, so I'd like to know, right?
Well, you know, as I said, there are a number of different steps possible, and I would prefer not to get into a hypothetical argument. It's possible, in the first place, I would think that when there is a difference like this, the president would be advised that he ought not to do this without the advice of cabinet. If he continues with that, then really, I would say, let's cross the bridge when we come to it.
And the same if he keeps on disrupting appointments.
I think Leanne wants to add something.
Just a point.
Thank you for your question. You can sit down.
When it comes to charitable causes, I don't see why you always have to point the finger at the government, because you should be galvanizing the society at large. I think the president's a bit like Angelina Jolie, or George Clooney. In the sense, they have star power, right? You know, there's an event and the president turns up, and everybody will listen to him. When George Clooney highlighted the plight of the Southern Sudanese, the UN kind of like, everybody started looking at that whole issue. So I think that the president can actually usefully use his star power, his celebrity, if you like, to actually promote charitable works among society at large.
Yes.
I don't think there'll be any objection to that.
Yeah, I think the president does do a lot of that. So let me, could I just ask you a hypothetical question? Because the line is sometimes not very clear. Huh? The president has been very active in helping all the different VWOs, volunteer welfare organizations, who look after our disabled children and adults, in fundraising, in visiting them, encouraging them. Supposing that he were to go to a school for children with a particular disability, and the president to follow the president. And suppose at the end of the visit, he were to say, I'm very impressed by the teachers, I'm very impressed by the student, but I think the physical plan of the school is not good enough. Is he crossing the red line?
I don't think so.
No, huh?
I don't think so. I think, these situations, Prof, have really got to be resolved by common sense. And he goes there, he looks at it. First of all, he would be entitled to say anything he thinks, including the physical plans or the lack of proper care, etc., to the Prime Minister. But separately in public, I think he's entitled to talk about the state of repair or disrepair.
Right.
And I wouldn't think that's crossing the line.
Okay, but would it cross a red line if he were to go further and say that Singapore has not yet acceded to the Convention on the Rights of the Disabled, that he should not say this in public?
Absolutely.
Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Okay.
That's because that has got to be decided. Those issues are decided in cabinet, which conventions we will accede to, and there are good reasons, at least in national interest, why we accede to some and why we don't accede to some. And really, it is not for the president to say that in public.
Okay. Next question, please.
Yes, thank you, Professor. I'm Anthony Chia. I have many affiliations, but my current affiliation is campaign manager for Mr. Tan Kin Lian. The other parts about me you can read in today's Straits Times. Now, I was sharing with you during the pre-registration that my wife told me, darling, you may be working for Tan Kin Lian, but if Professor Tommy Koh stands for the post, he's got my vote.
This is an irrelevant comment, no?
Okay.
I'm not a candidate.
Now, having been prepared.
Can you ask a relevant question?
Okay, now the question is, given the minister's explanation about the constitutional role of the president, if you were such a candidate, how would you position yourself and how would you campaign in a dignified manner, given the restrictions that now have been clearly specified by the minister? I have a follow-up, but maybe you could give a simple answer.
That's a good question. I mean, given the legal limitation that we all know now and respect, supposing you were a candidate for the office of the elected president, how would you conduct your campaign? What would be your key messages?
Well, the reason why I spent a little bit of time explaining the limitations is because there has been so much discussion, which, as I said, is divorced from legal reality. Can he do this? Can he do that? He is going to speak up. He is going to speak for the people. He is going to do this. So that doesn't mean, and I took some pains to emphasize, the president doesn't have powers. He both has clear, precise powers, very significant powers in 5 areas: detentions, corruption, investigations, appointments, key appointments. The way you corrupt a government is by having appointments suited to yourself, reserves. So you have significant power. So don't go away with this impression that it's limited. The point is, you can't do certain things. I don't see why the fact that you can do X number of things, you cannot do Y number of things, limits you in the way you campaign. You just make sure that what you say to the people is consistent with what you can constitutionally perform. Don't say things that you can't do.
Leanne has written about something that's going to happen soon, which is that each candidate, once the candidate gets a COE, will be allowed to hold one rally. And I've been actually quite puzzled,
Yes.
Supposing you're a candidate and you don't want to badmouth your friends who are also competing for the office, what can you say at your rally?
I'll just comment as a citizen of Singapore who actually voted in the first presidential elections. I remember it very vividly because it's the first time I ever voted. And I remember the 2 televised campaigns between Mr. Ong Teng Cheong and Mr. Chua Kim Yao. And I remember the first campaign, Mr. Chua Kim Yao basically said Mr. Ong Teng Cheong was the better candidate. So I would say that's not a good way of campaigning, first and foremost. I mean, humility and modesty to me are very important traits, but you're not going to get my vote if you're too self-effacing. And I do remember the second 10-minute TV slot, Mr. Chua Kim Yao seemed to, have eaten some chili padi, and he said, "Do you want a PAP president?" Which is a bit, okay, it's political because, Ong Teng Cheong had already resigned from the PAP. You cannot belong to a political party. But I would say that it's a really hard thing to campaign for because you are reactive. So you can't say, "I promise that when the government spends the money, I will say no." It's what everybody will say. And so I would say that the only thing you can do to distinguish yourself is to convince us you're independent, convince us you can swan su, you can count things, right? And convince me that you actually know what you're talking about when it comes to your role. I will never vote for someone who doesn't know what he's standing for. I think that's very basic. I will respect someone who actually knows, well, I'm being voted in to do this job. Right? And so as a voter, I would look to that competence in finance. You don't have to be a genius, but better than me, and that's not a very high threshold. And last but not least, an independent person. And I'll get that by watching the TV and going to a rally.
And when you are deciding this last criterion, the end, about independence, the fact that 3 of the candidates were previously members of a political party, would you hold that against them? Does that make them less independent? Or you would judge the character and say, the character of the person gives me confidence that if elected to the office, that he would act independently?
Well, I was very young when the first presidential elections came out, and my salad days, but as the minister knows, I'm in my yonder years now, so I'm a little bit wiser. Okay. And 20 years ago, I probably would have taken it against them, but I had the chance to actually work with President Ong on his first constitutional reference, and what struck me was how remarkably independent a thinker he was. So I would say personally, at least, I tend to look at a person, and I don't know how you judge these things, but I tend to see, I actually do believe that the office makes the person, and I guess I'll see whether or not the person has that kind of mentality. Once he gets into the position, he won't be beholden. Incidentally, if you look at the presidential oath, you have to swear allegiance to the Constitution, not to any political party you belong to. So, I would like to see the politicians who are members of political parties show me that they have knowledge of that clause. I will respect that.
Yeah.
May I
think, Anthony, I think you should give way to another person.
I have a follow-up.
I'll call on you later.
Yeah, okay.
Let's give others a chance first. As a historical footnote, for those who are interested in history, Leanne, Walter Woon, Joe Greenberg, and I were part of the legal team that advised President Ong Teng Cheong in a legal dispute between him and... Huh? You couldn't, huh? Yeah. And,
1995.
and 1995, which went to the Court of Appeal. I think the question of independence is a good point, you know. So I think that maybe I should ask Minister Shanmugam to just say a word about what do you understand by independent, and how would you judge whether a candidate is independent or not?
Prof, at the end of the day, it comes to the timber of the man. Is he of a presidential timber? Is he able to discharge the duties in the way that commentators have set out? Skill, wisdom, knowledge, the ability to discharge those duties with the right mix of acumen, and also know how he can influence the government. It doesn't matter what his past affiliations were or are, as President Ong proved.
Yeah, right. Thank you. I think you have been standing there longer, right? So I go to you first, then you. Yeah, please.
Yeah, hi,
Please introduce yourself and state
Hi,
your
my name is
question.
Bhavan. I'm an undergraduate from NTU. My question is not specifically on the elected president, but on the Council of Presidential Advisors. I'd like the panelists' views on the constitutional or legal role of the CPA, the composition of the CPA, considering the fact that PM, CJ, and Head of Civil Service have nominees, and how they are selected.
That's a very good question. Yeah. Who wants to start first? The Council of Presidential Advisors. The Council of Presidential Advisors. Do you know the composition of the council? The president appoints 2 members of the council, including the chairman. The prime minister appoints 2 members. The chairman of the Public Service Commission appoints 1 member. Did I leave out anything else?
One on the advice of the CJ.
And the Chief Justice appoints 1 member. And those appointees comprise the Council of Presidential Advisors. I've actually interviewed members of the council, and they meet regularly. They basically focus on the first of the president's 5 powers, the protection of the reserves. But I will ask Minister and Lian to ask Shan whether they could throw more light into the working of the Council of Presidential Advisors, the relationship between the council and the president. Lian, go first. You go first.
Right. Well, there's not very much known on how they operate, obviously, because the meetings are held in private, and I suppose you can be more candid in private. So from the constitutional perspective, this is what I said in my speech, that the president is not acting alone. He actually has a constitutional duty to consult the Council of Presidential Advisors over certain stipulated matters. He may consult them for other things. I think the upshot is this, since he chooses at least, a third of the council, he would want to have good advisors. And I guess at the end of the day, it's no matter what he's advised, the chips still fall upon his shoulders. Right? It's still the president's responsibility, because anything that an advisor says is not binding.
Well, I'm not sure I can add much more, because I haven't been a party to those deliberations, and they're advisedly kept confidential. And the real test is who the people are there who are advising the president. But if you look at the constitutional structure, for example, almost all the financial powers, the president's powers to block in respect of the finances, he has a discretion, but he must consult the CPA. The powers to appoint people to various important positions, a number of them, the Constitution has gone through and said he must consult the CPA. So these powers of the president have been carefully looked at, what he must consult the CPA on, what he has ultimate discretion, where he needs to follow the advice of the cabinet. These are all set out in the Constitution.
I think I'll just add one more point, which is interesting. If the Council of Presidential Advisors does not support the president's wish to veto, the parliament can override that veto by a 2/3 majority. But if the president's veto has the support of the council, then the Parliament doesn't have the power to override his veto. Yeah, I think that's an important point. Yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
Your turn.
Thank you, Prof. Koh. My name is Samuel Locke. Talking about the process in which our elected presidency have evolved, I feel good that we have seen 11 constitutional amendments. But if the key role of the president is to safeguard reserves, then perhaps the concept of risk management ought to be integrated into this process. Now, I understand that the legal operations from a limited understanding of law requires legal precedent. But I think, do we not think that we need innovation also and adaptation to changing realities as the other part of the process of the operation of law? So if we take an example, TEPCO in Japan, why did this thing happen to Japan, and why was the impact so heavy? It wasn't because TEPCO didn't do anything. It was a disagreement on the envelope of risk that was involved. So there was seismologist evidence to say that we will have a tsunami of this scale, and TEPCO settled for a smaller scale tsunami and built a smaller seawall. There was a seawall that was built, money was spent, but it wasn't high enough. And that shortage of 5 meters of that seawall was all it took for the tsunami to come in and destroy the rest of the thing. So what if we have a situation in the country where in private, the people in government have one perception of the envelope of risk, the president sees a different envelope of risk. And if I may quote, I think a former chairman of Harvard Board of Governors, he used to say this. He said, I get worried when there's not enough debate in a government Board of Governors decision. So I can understand the separation of powers, smooth running of a government, and I agree with that. But what if the situation is so dire and the envelope perceptions are so different, and that needs great debate? Would the government consider a situation of a 12th amendment and say for certain things under mutual consent that you might have different points of view add out there? Because I know this is politically sensitive probably, but what if the envelope of risk is so great? What provisions do we have under the existing system to safeguard Singapore?
I think we got your question, yeah. But you know, and I asked both Minister and Lian to join me in responding. It's not an area in which the president has been empowered so that he can use his moral suasion to speak to the Prime Minister at a weekly meeting, to share with him his concern that maybe we are under-providing, that maybe our risk scenario is not adequate. But I think it's not an area in which the president can prevail over the cabinet.
You see, any system devised by man, any political system, ultimately it has got to be run by people. And people are imperfect. So whatever system you have, it's a question of whether they have the competence, the skill, the judgment to come to the right decision. If we didn't have the elected presidency, all these decisions would have to be made ultimately by the companies concerned and by the regulators and, where necessary, by the ministers. The fact that we have an elected presidency with a specific set of powers doesn't give the president to intervene on these issues. The risk management approach is important, but it has got to be dealt with by the government.
And by the government, we would also include the role of the parliamentary opposition. You have to look at the bigger democratic checks and balances as well.
Okay, next question, please. Right at the back.
Yeah. My name is Tan Sri Peng, alumnus University of Malaya. It seems to me that before the 1991 amendment, normally, traditionally, the president is only a ceremonial head. But by investing him with some political power, don't you think we are opening the Pandora's box? Because once he tasted the power, then he said more is better. So in that case, he will ask for more and more. That's why everybody thinks that the president can do this, can do that, can do that. And then, as you know, Lee Kuan Yew is kind of a good lawyer. He would say, okay, to control the damage, we try to reduce him by having this power limited in this area, that area, and so on. So I was thinking to the layman,
Okay, so
a president is a president.
What's your question?
Yeah.
Are you
So I was thinking, because of all this confusion and all that, everybody now get confused whether what president can do, cannot do. But if probably government can come up with some maybe white paper or yellow paper, whatever it is, setting up briefly what the president can and cannot do, in that case, then I think it will reduce the confusion.
Okay, so maybe I will misrepresent you by asking a question on your behalf, which is, given all this, should the government reconsider abolishing the elected presidency and going back to the status quo ante, or have the president elected by the parliament? I think professors like to speculate, right? And they are good at answering hypothetical questions. So I think I should ask Leanne to respond.
Well, okay, apparently you're asking me whether or not the presidency should be abolished because nobody understands how it works.
Yeah.
Okay, as an educator, I will say, then we need to learn to understand. And I think there have been very valiant efforts by the Ministry of Law and the Ministry of Finance. If you check their websites, there are all these explanatory notes. I think Singaporeans, we need to do the homework. This is a different issue from, this addresses the issue of understanding. The normative question of whether to have a president, well, I've written a lot on it, I'm not going to talk about it today.
Okay. Sean?
Well, it'll be interesting if the government went into yellow journalism, or yellow paper. But, you know, there have been so many white papers which have explained the position of the elected president in very clear terms. There have been parliamentary debates. What I read out to you from Mr. Lee was only a very short excerpt. Then Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong explained it in great detail. Ministry of Law recently issued a statement saying what the powers are of the elected president. But at the end of the day, it depends on how much of this people really understand. And really, in any democracy, in any open society, it's the task of the government to continue with the message and explain clearly what the powers are, what the issues are, and we will continue to try and do that.
Yeah, I agree. So I would just also say that it's a very unique institution. It's a very Singaporean invention. We have a parliamentary system. We have decided to give the president some specific powers in order to create a better system of checks and balances. It is a relatively new institution, so it will continue to evolve. And I think it's really premature to say that it's too controversial, too difficult, why don't we abolish it? So I think that I think it's a good invention. Let us try to make it work, try to explain to everybody, especially the electorate, what the president's empowered to do, what is not empowered to do. We need to educate all the aspirants for office, the fine line between what they can and should do and what the red line which they shouldn't cross. And I think on the case of supporting the disabled, I gave a couple of examples where what is permissible, in fact, very good for the president to do, and where the red line is, and one shouldn't cross that red line, I think. So I think that you shouldn't be so discouraged and pessimistic. Let's make the institution work, I think. You?
Professor Koh,
Yeah.
I'm Kenneth Chu.
Yes, Kenneth.
I would like to raise a number of points here. Firstly, Dr. Teo had mentioned earlier about the paid-up capital of $99 million. That comes under the purview of the PEC, under Article 19. If I may say so, Article 19 is defective and fraud. Has a lot of defects. A paid-up capital of 100 million or even 200 million means nothing. It could well be a bankrupt company if its liability exceeds its assets. So what Dr. Teo have said earlier is we should look at the candidates, the character of the candidate, the ability of the candidate, the integrity of the candidate, which is much more important. And foremost, to the citizens of Singapore now, they are more concerned with the independence of the president, because the president is being elected by the citizens of Singapore and should, and as you all have pointed out, no political affiliation should be above. Therefore,
So
it's
what-
time that
what-
we should.
What's your question, Kenneth?
The question is that we must relook at our constitution and clean up a lot of dirt inside, a lot of defects inside, have it more transparent. Because a lot of things citizens are asking, is it transparent? Is it accountable? Because a lot of things has been bulldozed through in the past. Let me give you a simple example. If I'm the president of the country, most important thing to me is national security. Now, if the minister in charge of national security makes a huge boo-boo, in any other country, he would have resigned or he would have been sacked. In some country, he would have committed hirikiri. In our context, nothing was said. Oh, it's not my problem. It
I'm
is
sorry,
my
I think,
underlings.
I think you're digressing, you know. Can you come back to the...
The point here is this, the
What-
president...
Come back to your question. Please formulate your question.
Okay, the question is this. If the Prime Minister continue to have him in his cabinet and with the discontent of the citizens to him, should he not talk to the Prime Minister quietly and say, don't you think it's about time you get rid of that fella? Your moral standing is being questioned. Your leadership is being questioned. And if, assuming the Prime Minister refuses, what can the President do?
No, I think, okay, I think
I would like the
but
Minister of Law.
You're making a statement, you're not asking a question.
I'd like to ask that what would the Minister of Law handle this kind of matter? Or if he's the Prime Minister, how would he handle this matter? If he's in conflict with the President said, I am not going to approve his reappointment. Where do we stand? I'm prepared to bring it to the people and let the people
I'm sorry.
decide.
I think, okay, I think you've spoken long enough. I think that on the PEC, Leanne already said earlier that she is not in favor of the PEC. She would rather
Right.
we do away with it. Minister Shanmugam has said we need the PEC.
But you need to refine some of the defects inside.
You want to comment on the criteria?
I'm not quite sure what the defects are, to be sure, Mr. Chu, because you talked about integrity, character. Those words appear in Article 19. In fact, among the factors the PEC should consider are that the person has got to satisfy it that he is a person of integrity, good character, and reputation.
Right.
So all that the PEC does is sort of act as some sort of sieve, as a pre-qualification mechanism.
Right.
And ultimately, it is for the people to decide.
Right.
Of the candidates who are presented, it's really to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Right.
And certain basic qualifications, and then you go on for elections, and it's up to the people to choose rightfully based on what the president can do and who they think can best do what or discharge the duties of the office. As to what the president should do, should there be a minister who he thinks is not up to the mark, you know, we don't know what takes place in the discussions between the Prime Minister and the President, the regular discussions, and there is a good constitutional and conventional reason for it. And the President is entitled to speak his mind freely. But ultimately, the Prime Minister, for example, among all the appointments that the President has got to approve, he doesn't have to approve the cabinet appointments because those are political appointments. The Prime Minister takes sole responsibility for the cabinet appointments. He goes to the elections with the cabinet that he has chosen, and he puts before the people his track record, and it's for the people to judge.
Right. Okay, thank you. Cherian?
Excuse me, sir.
Sorry, I think let's give other people a chance.
Sure.
Can I respond to him?
Oh, okay, Leanne. Yeah.
I'd just like to respond to make 2 points. If the president is aggrieved over the performance of a certain minister, as minister said, we don't know what goes on in private. So that's that level. But there's also the level, a more public level within Parliament itself. So don't discount Parliament. As far as the Presidential Elections Committee is concerned, I do believe one way you can improve it is by imposing a legal duty on the PEC to give reasons for its decision. As far as I know, that does not exist now. I think that's not good in a rule of law state. The Chief Justice is accountable because we read his judgments. Right. The Minister for Law is accountable because he stands for elections, the President as well. I think anyone who exercises public power in Singapore should be subject to some mechanism of accountability, and I would suggest humbly a duty to give reasons.
Okay, so Leanne makes a proposal. This doesn't require a legal amendment, no? It can be done by
Statute.
by agreement. I think that in the interest of transparency, she thinks that the PEC should give reasons for its decisions. In both cases, when they give a COE and cases where they reject a COE.
And it shouldn't be one line.
And it shouldn't be one line. Okay. All right. That's okay. Chairman, please.
Thank you, Prof. Koh. All this talk of COE makes me wonder how much will it cost? Well, that's a different story. As a non-lawyer, I am more comfortable with hypothetical scenarios rather than what's in the law. So please allow me to present another one, which I guess is an extreme one that I hope I will not see in my lifetime, but one that is interesting because it doesn't seem to fall within those clearly defined categories of executive power that the president is supposed to exercise, yet one where, as a citizen, I would actually hope that the president would come out strongly, independently, and publicly. And the scenario would be, is one of, say, of rising ethnic tensions in Singapore. Imagine a situation where the government of the day mishandles such rising tension, where maybe because of a series of misstatements or missteps by the executive, including by the Prime Minister, certain sections of the population actually begin to lose faith in the judgment of cabinet. I, as a citizen, would actually expect and hope that in such a situation, an elected president would see that it is part of his role as a unifying force and as someone who carries his reserve powers to actually come out before Singapore reaches the brink. And with words of comfort and wisdom and patience, tell people to calm down. I think back to the situation in 1992 in Thailand, where the Thai king actually called the politicians to the palace and chided them in front of the cameras. Is that unrealistic? Would that be? Would we still insist that the president plays his unifying role in as silent a way as other unifying symbols like the flag and the merlion? Or would it be the proper thing for him to do to actually come out rather than seek the advice of a government that has already mishandled the situation and independently bring his wisdom to bear on such a situation?
Thank you, Chairman. Minister?
Cherian, I think your question exposes a nub of the angst that many people feel. It starts with a concern that the government could go wrong. And I agree, any government can go wrong. Yeah, let's start with that. But in any democratic system, those are among the risks that you take with any government. Whether the PAP government or some other government or a coalition government or in this country or any country, governments can make mistakes. They can sometimes seriously mishandle. And that is why you have elections. And the only remedy really is to rectify that during elections. What you're hoping for, we have elections through a president and he can somehow calm things down. Our model is not the Thai monarchy. Our model, as I traced for you, is the English monarchy and its conventions, and even more limited than the English monarchy. And you have never seen an English queen have the two opposition, the Prime Minister and the opposition, crawling on their knees in front of her. That's not the model. The hypothetical that you're talking about, if the president spoke up in that situation, he would be acting completely unconstitutionally. That is not the role for the president.
Let me give you an example closer to home.
Right.
Yeah? A few weeks ago, His Majesty the Agong of Malaysia invited Prime Minister Najib and the leader of an NGO called Bersih to call on His Majesty in his palace in order to head off what he saw was likely to be a confrontation that will bring disorder, chaos to Kuala Lumpur. The Agong tried to make peace by suggesting that, by persuading the Bersih not to have an outdoor demonstration, but to have it in a stadium. And he tried to persuade the Prime Minister of Malaysia to agree to give a permit to let Bersih hold their demonstration in a stadium. I'm not actually sure whether under the Constitution of Malaysia, the Agong has the power to do this, but this is just acting in his good offices. If we were to face such a situation in Singapore, is that an inappropriate exercise of the good offices of the president?
I would distinguish the situations in this way, Prof. I think in the first place, when the Agong asked Ambika Srinivasan to come over, the press reports we read suggest that it was actually with the consent and at the request of the Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. And if the Prime Minister actually approached the President in Singapore or the Agong in Malaysia, the Agong would be entirely acting within his rights to then have a conversation with somebody else. Can he, of his own volition, invite people over and give them advice? My own view would be, if it is kept out of the public view and he talks to them privately, it should be possible, but I will read a passage from Bogdanov for you to show you how strict the rules are. This is the same Bogdanov that I referred to, expert on parliamentary affairs. He says, it sets out all the principles, and then he says, the consequences of this fundamental principle about the sovereign not engaging in publicly with the government were drawn out by the constitutional lawyer Sir William Manson in his authoritative work, The Law and Custom of the Constitution, and first published in 1892 as first, that she should not take advice from others in matters of state unknown to them. Next, that she should not give public expression to opinions on matters of state without consulting them. Them here means cabinet. And lastly, that she should accept their advice when offered by them as a cabinet and support them while they remain her servants. The first principle, that the sovereign should not take advice from others without the knowledge of her ministers, requires her not to consult other politicians without the approval of her prime minister. So I think one has got to be careful here. I think one can say there is a gray area where the president invites both sides and talks to them, provided he doesn't get embroiled. Right. But really, every political step the president takes, whether he wants to meet with the opposition members of parliament, as in England, should be with the advice of the prime minister.
Okay, all right. Please.
Thank you, Prof. My name is Yuan Murigesu, Singaporean, looking forward to the campaign which will be starting.
Speak louder, please.
Thank you for the panel for clarifying the custodial reactionary powers of the elected president. Recently, we had a dialogue session with Dr. Tan Cheng Bock at the alumni and a very vigorous Q&A session. And one circumstance which presented, which I would like to ask the panel, is that he mentioned that in certain exceptional circumstances, the elected president can call for a national referendum. And perhaps the panel can explain, in terms of the Constitution, when such a situation might arise, when it is a gridlock situation and there's no progress forward, and when the elected president can actually call for a referendum. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuan. Thank you. Leanne, please.
The only relevant clause I can think about is Article 52A, but it's not true that the president can call for referendum. Article 52A, which is not in force, has to deal with amending certain parts of the Constitution, and the president can actually say you don't need a referendum if he consents to the amendment itself.
But he has no
he can't
call for a referendum. Yeah. Okay. Okay, somebody in the back, is it? Okay.
Hello. My name is Angela Oon.
Can you bring the microphone down so that
Yeah.
we can hear you? Can the gentleman sitting behind, can you help her, please? Yeah.
Hi, can you hear
And
me?
Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Angela Oon. I'm a member of the Workers' Party, but I'm asking the question in my
Okay,
personal
Angela.
capacity. I think Mr. Shanmugam has made it very clear that the Constitution both defines and circumscribes what the elected president can do. And if he oversteps those boundaries, I think Mr. Shanmugam has said that there would be consequences, but he didn't want to elaborate on them. What I find curious is that in response to another question, Professor Theo Lian said that if the president oversteps his bounds, that the courts don't have the purview, to issue these punitive measures. So it goes back, it seems to me, to a political process which, is evolutionary. So I think it's not unreasonable, and I apologize, but for me to push Mr. Shanmugam to elaborate on what would happen, if the elected president does something that the Constitution doesn't explicitly allow.
Okay, thank you. Since there are three other friends waiting to ask questions and we have 10 minutes less, I'm going to give them the floor. Can you all be brief, the three of you, and then I'm going to ask the three of us to give composite answers to all the 4 questions. Is that okay? Then everybody will have a chance. You, please, and then 2 on the side.
Hi.
Make it brief, please.
Okay, hi. My name is Kirk Wong. I'm not affiliated with any party. I just have one quick question. A number of candidates have mentioned something
Speak
that
louder, please.
They would like to influence how the reserves are going to be managed and invested. Can the elected president, to what extent can the elected president actually influence the management of reserves?
Can you hear that? I could not hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Repeat your question.
Okay, I just want to know to what extent the elected president can influence the management of the reserves.
What's the question, Janitas?
How to spend money.
Okay. Please.
Thanks, Prof. Koh. Eugene Tan from the School of Law at the Singapore Management University. I think it's quite clear that the elected president's office is a very, very much misunderstood office. And I think I partly attribute that to the fact that the last presidential elections was almost 20 years ago, right, in 1993. It is not the job of the government, of course, to engineer an election. But I think it is important that a process, that Singaporeans get to know actually what the president does. I think what we see now really are the ceremonial trappings of the presidency, right? And so in a very different climate today, right, there is a sense that the president, given the amount that he's remunerated, right, that it seems quite a lot to pay, right, for what is essentially very ceremonial functions. So I think it is important for an institution like the elected president, that a process by which Singaporeans can better understand what the president does, right? Especially those relating to his executive stroke custodial powers, right? Which tend to happen go behind the scenes, right? And so now you have this situation in which it becomes a very useful electoral gimmick to overpromise, right? So let's open the Istana, make it a public. Anyone can go in anytime. Right. I'll donate half my salary to charity. So maybe we should give the presidency to the lowest bidder, right? So what I'm saying here is really, that in the end, because of the sort of misunderstanding, misperceptions,
yeah. Okay.
All
right.
Yeah,
thank you. So Eugene, your question is, how can
Singaporeans better understand
help the president explain to the people his many duties and what he does in order to earn his generous salary? Okay. Final question.
Okay, Anthony Chia, Tankin campaign. Very briefly, when Ong Teng Cheong was considering re-election, his health became an issue brought up by cabinet. Since it's such a very important position, should we not apply the requirement for health check for all candidates? Thank you.
You go for it.
As far as health checks is concerned, I think all candidates voluntarily actually release some things. So, in a sense, if I was a candidate and people were concerned about my health, I'd release everything and say, see, I'm so transparent, vote me, okay? So I would turn it into a political brownie point. As far as the pay is concerned, well, I'm looking forward to read President Nathan's autobiography. That's all I'll say. Can the elected president affect the management of reserves? No. And last, if the elected president is a little naughty, what can be done? There actually is a legal procedure. It's in Article 22L, and it actually provides for a removal process. It's a bit complicated, but it's for things like treason, moral turpitude, and the broadest one is intentional violation of the Constitution, and it actually involves both the judiciary and parliament. So there is that way out. And of course, elections as well.
Okay.
You want me to answer all the 3 questions?
All the 4 questions.
All the 4 questions. I don't think, I'm not sure I can add much more to what Leanne has said on the issue of medical certificates. I think it's something that Singaporeans are entitled to ask of the candidates, and it's for the candidates to satisfy people that their health is not an issue, if it's made an issue in the first place. As for a somewhat politically angled question from Ms. Woon, who wants to press me on what can be done, it's all in black and white in the Constitution as to what can be done. For example, if there is a disagreement between the President and the Cabinet or government as to whether the President's actions are constitutional or unconstitutional, the courts are entitled to rule upon them. And if supposing the President engages in a certain course of conduct, which is ruled unconstitutional by the courts, and then if the President continues to engage, and I cannot imagine such a situation ever developing, so this is really a hypothetical upon a hypothetical, based on a question that is asked for a political reason, then I will say in response, Article 22L of the Constitution sets out what the consequences can be.
Okay. Janadas, you want to say anything?
Sorry, there was a question on whether the President can influence the management of reserves.
Yeah.
I think the answer is President should comply with the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean the President on reserve, the President has no proactive power, to manage or to give advice on how it should be managed. His power is to prevent a government from spending the accumulated reserves of the previous government. We have 5 minutes more. Got 2. Janadas, there are 2 persistent friends of mine. If I give you the floor, will you promise to join the IPS?
Coercion.
Okay, brief, very quick.
Okay.
Very quick.
I just want to ask, because the minister said that the election is a point of inflection for change. And Professor Teo rightly pointed out that the independence of a candidate is actually vital, and I think most Singaporeans coming to the presidential election would also see it as that. My question is, if everything is behind closed doors, and if the president decides to stand for re-election, on what basis do Singaporeans have an informed basis to make the decision to re-elect, not re-elect? Thank you.
Okay, right. Okay, you answer. Vincent, quickly, please. Yeah.
My name is Vincent Chan. 2 quick points. One is that today we have 5 prospective candidates for the presidency. And in future elections, there might even be more. What happens if the winning or the candidate with the highest number of votes only garners, say, 22 or 25% of the votes? Should we begin to think of a runoff for the leading 2 candidates so that the one that's elected at least has the moral authority to be elected by most of the candidates?
Thank you, Vincent.
And secondly is, we say that the president holds a very important ceremonial role, going to represent Singapore in other countries, etc. This is the only office where the wives picture is also presented in all the buildings in Singapore, government buildings, etc. We have no idea, except maybe apart from Mrs. Tony Tan, we have no idea what the other wives even look like and how they might, they might represent us at state dinners and ceremonies.
It's not true, no? The newspapers have been publicizing the photos of all the wives. By the way, under our constitution, there's no such office as the office of the First Lady, you know? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we got actually 3 questions. So,
I will answer one legal
Lian,
one.
you answer the first one, and Chan, you answer the 2.
The first one is relatively easy because the Constitution actually has a provision. The question was, if someone wants to stand for election, how do Singaporeans make an informed choice? Let's say that the President had to say okay to a very extensive drawdown on public reserves. He actually has to give reasons which have to be gazetted. So there's actually public knowledge. So there is a pool of knowledge if you know how to find a gazette concerning how a president makes his decisions. Of course, if the president has a media conference as well, you can also do a search to see his thinking process, as President Nathan gave a fairly extensive interview concerning the 2009 drawdown.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I may add to that, you see, on that question, I mean, it touches on something that is a constant refrain in many other issues. It keeps coming up because in any particular issue, we look at it and we say, oh, this is less than perfect. Yes, it's less than perfect that you don't know exactly what the Prime Minister and President have been discussing over the last 6 years. But what is the alternative? The alternative is to publish all their discussions. Do you think that's feasible? So you see, we've got to stop looking for the perfect solution. We've got to take the best available solution and then make a choice with that. There are risks in those choices.
Yeah.
The question on whether a president who gets 20-30% will have the moral authority, the US president, where voting is not compulsory, I think roughly less than 50% of the people vote sometimes, and the president gets elected on the basis of the voting of 22-23% of the people, and he becomes the most powerful man in the world. So, you know, that's the first past the post system.
I guess Vincent's point is that if there are more than 2 candidates, whether we should follow the system which is in place in other countries, that the 3rd and 4th will be eliminated in the first round, and then you have a runoff between the first and second candidate. I guess the logic is that you want the winner to have a very substantial mandate from the electorate, and that this would empower him or her with a moral authority. I think this is Vincent's point, right?
I don't have the political authority to answer that question,
Yeah.
whether we can change the system.
Yeah. So I just want to thank all of you very much for coming. I hope that the 3 of us have succeeded in helping everybody to understand better what the roles, the functions, the powers of the president are, what the gray areas are, and help you to judge wisely on the 17th of August. Thank you for coming. 27 August.
Yeah, that was quite good. That was very good. This is explain, at least they understand. I don't know how much of this.